Hi, welcome to Live Life Inspired with Autism. I'm Antoinette and I'm a life coach and I'm also a parent to my own autistic son, Max. Now today I have a special surprise for you, my first ever guest on the podcast. Now Olivia is a spell to communicate practitioner and she's actually Max's spending partner as well. And for the longest time we've been talking about doing a podcast together. So welcome, Olivia. So tell us who you are and how you got into spelling.
Well, thank you. You guys know I love any and every opportunity to talk about spelling to communicate and all the things. So yeah, I am a spelling to communicate practitioner. I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I have been a practitioner for, I want to say, about 4 years now. So prior to moving back to North Carolina, I was working in Tennessee, which is where I heard about spelling for the first time, went through training and had some really, really cool opportunities to learn there, to work with some incredible open spellers and some incredible practitioners out in Tennessee as well. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and to chat a little bit. And anyone hearing about spelling for the first time, it's the biggest shift change ever for parents hearing about it. So I'm excited.
Very excited to find out all about it so we can tell our people, our listeners. Okay, so for the parents who have never heard about spell to communicate before, what is it? And what is spelling and free spelling? And what does it mean when we say non-speaking and unreliable speakers? Because non-speaking doesn't really mean like they're completely mute. They do have mutes. So tell us what it is.
Yeah. So spelling to communicate, it is just a low-tech form of alternative augmentative communication. So S2C is for specifically those individuals who we have some sort of sensory motor disorder going on, which affects our speech, right? So that can be if we are non-speaking and we might not have any sort of speech sounds that are audible. We might have minimal speech where we're able to, make requests verbally. Maybe we're requesting bathroom or car ride or chicken nugget, whatever that may be, but it's not a robust form of communication that we can use through speech. And then also we have those individuals that are unreliable speakers that might have loads and loads and loads of speech, but it's very repetitive. It's very looped. It is very, I might ask them a question and they might repeat the question back to me, or the answer might be yes to everything. So just kind of this umbrella of we can't use speech as a reliable, robust means of communication are all good people that would be a good candidate for spelling to communicate. So we kind of work up this cognitive and motor hierarchy as we go, which I'm sure we'll get more into later, but I'll just go ahead and kind of show everyone the forward flick like, if you can kind of see them. I have my screen kind of blurred, but hopefully everyone gets the idea. So we always start on what is called the 3 boards. They look a little bit different for different people. And I'll show this too as well. I know it's a little blurred out there, but
so it's just sort of like a cardboard board with the letters kind of stuck on so that they could see what it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But the goal with spelling to communicate is not teaching these kiddos or adults, whatever age that they're starting at. It's not teaching them how to spell. The issue is this motor piece, right? I know we've talked about it before in Max's sessions, but this term apraxia is just not talked about enough, right? And that's kind of the key piece in everything that we do in spelling to communicate. With apraxia, it's really just that breakdown in the motor planning process. So with that in mind and kind of going off of that and spelling to communicate, we are teaching the motor, right? So I know you know the letter A. I know you know how to spell this word that I'm asking you to spell. Let's actually get your body to actually touch the letter or poke through the letter. Kind of that general overview. I always compare it to if I wanted to go out and run a marathon. I'm not a runner, right? It would take a lot of effort, a lot of training, a lot of all of the things for me to be able to go out and run a marathon. Kind of the same thing for our spellers is you can't just go out and run 26.2 miles off the bat, right? There's so much work and groundwork that goes into it. So our process is very similar to that, kind of comparing to training for a marathon.
Okay. Oh, great. Well, we get into that, the more details a little bit later.
Yeah.
one of the things I think that haunts a lot of parents of non-speaking or minimally speaking children is the fear that their kids don't understand. And, that the kid is there, but the lights are on and nobody's home type of thing. So can you speak to that just so parents know what's going on there?
Yeah. Biggest thing is just going back to that motor piece. If you look at any sort of IQ testing or traditional assessments, whether that's in school or by another therapist, whatever that may be, we're essentially testing motor output, right? Of any test I'm going to give you, you're going to have some sort of motor response to this. And when we know that this apraxia motor piece is the issue, a lot of things are going to be inaccurate. A lot of things are going to be underestimated of what is actually being understood if we can't actually show it. So kind of going into that presuming competence piece, right? It's the least dangerous assumption to presume that your kid is understanding and is listening and can learn and does want to learn. Because the fact is we don't know, right? If we don't have reliable communication, if we don't have control of our motor, then how are you supposed to show and demonstrate consistently what you are aware of and what you are understanding?
Yeah, I mean, it's so sad that most of the parents, they know there's something going on, but they don't know how to get there. So when you talk about apraxia, where can parents go to actually find out if their kiddos have got apraxia?
Yeah. A few different things. A developmental pediatrician you could start with. A lot of the kiddos that I see, they have heard of the term apraxia of speech, which is more of a speech therapist kind of role, and looking at that and seeing if that is something that comes into play. More often than not, what I see in the kiddos that I see is not just apraxia affecting speech, but it's really this whole body global apraxia. So your speech or even your movements, right? Being able to initiate fine motor, gross motor, any and all the things. I will say this too, though, even getting, whether that be a diagnosis or whatever it is of apraxia, there's so many times, I would say 90% of the time of people that I see have never heard of the term, even from speech therapists talking about verbal apraxia. So it is one of those things that I always ask parents about whenever I'm about to start working with their child, but it's not something that we require per se to start spelling sessions.
Yeah. Okay. And then a lot of the non-speaking kiddos are really catastrophically underestimated. And it's just basically because we measure intelligence by the ability to speak, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people think that they are intellectually disabled because they can't speak, but that's not actually true, right?
Right. Absolutely. And the biggest thing there is looking at speech versus language, right? Speech is 100% a motor skill. And then when you're looking at language, it's coming from entirely different parts of the brain than what controls our speech production. So I always tell parents whenever I'm first meeting them and kind of explaining all the things of if I'm sitting in my apartment and I'm watching a movie and it's just me and my dog here, right? Just because I'm not speaking and telling my dog, oh my goodness, did you just see what so-and-so on the screen did to her? Doesn't make it any less of my thoughts, right? I can have these thoughts. I'm taking in all the information. That's receptive language. I'm having my own thoughts and ideas in response to the movie I'm watching. That's expressive language, right? It is going on with or without me verbalizing, with or without me using that motor output of speech. But it's one of those common things I hear all the time from parents of, well, they don't have expressive language, and we're equalizing that to speech. But it's very, very different. It's very different.
Well, that's good to know, I think, for parents. So the philosophy, you've just touched on it, for Spell to Communicate, talks about presuming competence. So, this touches on what you've just spoken about, but what does that mean, presuming competence in partially speaking, minimally speaking, autistic kids?
Yeah, absolutely. With that presuming competence piece, every kiddo that walks in, biggest thing that my shift in presuming competence has kind of changed in my practice is just talking directly to them. And they might be running around the room, they might be screaming, they might be trying to get out the door. But talking directly to them has been the biggest thing, because I think you do understand and you do want to be here and you do want to learn, but your body is the tricky part. So having that shift to, it really is the least dangerous assumption, right? If I was to assume every kiddo who came into my office and was having some dysregulation, if I just automatically assumed, well, you don't want to be here, or you don't understand, it looks like refusal, and I just wrote them off, how many kiddos aren't going to have access?
Yes. It's almost automatic that you do that. I mean, even as a parent, sometimes you forget and that's what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a hard line to figure out what's apraxia and what is all the other things that we're taught, right? I tell people all the time, a lot of times apraxia does look like avoidance or refusal, or I don't understand, or I don't want to. And oftentimes it is the complete opposite of that. It's maybe I want to do this thing so bad, I just can't get my body to cooperate. Yeah.
Okay. So what does it look like when a parent first realizes that their kiddo has been listening, that they do understand, and that they're thinking the whole time? I mean, you've done quite a few beginners, right? So what happens? What do you notice with the parents?
Lots of emotions. I think the biggest one is almost a little bit of guilt, right? Especially depending on the kiddo's age. There's a handful of people that I've started with in their 20s and 30s, and we had decades, right, of no communication, no reliable means of anything. So a lot of guilt is probably that first emotion that I see once we kind of get over that hump of belief, because everyone else has always told you that this is it for your child. And this is what they understand. And this is kind of their cap. And more often than not, spelling to communicate kind of blows open that cap that has been on their child for so long. So lots of different emotions. But I think the biggest one that we finally get to once we kind of cycle through all the things is just hope, which I feel like a lot of times parents might have lost at that point, depending on what other professionals and what other therapists have kind of told them. So lots of emotions there, but I would say those are probably the biggest three that I see with people.
I remember the time I heard, I was like in complete shock. I don't think I actually took in what the practitioner was saying to me. And afterwards, I was like, this just opens so many doors. I mean, it's crazy.
Absolutely.
You help with the spellers. So can parents learn to use the boards? Because I think a lot of parents also underestimate their ability to be able to learn how to do something like this, how to learn something new, be able to work with their parents. So what would you say to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do what's called communication regulation partner training. So that is just training, whether that be a parent or a teacher or a staff member or whatever that is, kind of our same process that kiddo has already gone through with their practitioner, and kind of replicate it at home. For a lot of spellers, it's really hard to generalize between spelling partners. So we kind of start back from the beginning with any new person on the letterboard. And you go through that whole kind of process again, building up the motor and doing lesson-based sessions and all of those things. But absolutely, it's hard. What I have seen is that a lot of times spellers, whether it's their mom or their dad or whoever it may be, that's the one person they want to communicate the most with. So it is so emotional, which we know is so dysregulating, which makes it that much harder to get there with the parent. But spellers do it all the time, right? They have CRPs or spelling partners that are their parents or whoever that may be. But it's definitely, it's work to get there. Absolutely. Like it is with anything else.
Yeah. Of course. Just say to the parents that are kind of skeptical about about spell to communicate? It sounds too good to be true. What would you say to those people?
Yeah. Honestly, just give it a shot. I always tell parents coming in, give it 6 months, right? And that is not saying in 6 months your kid is going to be freely communicating. That's incredibly fast, right? That's a lot to do in 6 months. But I tell people, give it 6 months to see any sort of progress. So if we're working on regulation for 6 months, give us 6 months to get to a more regulated spot. If that is transitioning from our 3 boards where we have the alphabet split up, going to the 26 board, but just 6 months to just see and talk to me, and really just see what your kid can do, right? A lot of times whenever I have parents and they have that shift start to happen too, if they start presuming competence, we see progress skyrocket, right? Because now it's not just me believing in you for 50 minutes out of your week. You get to go home and your parents get to talk to you like you're listening and understanding too, which is kind of the biggest piece in all of that. But that's why I say to everyone is give it 6 months. Let's see where we're at in 6 months. And if you're not bought into it and if you're not amazed and just over the moon in 6 months, honestly, I haven't had it happen. So I don't know what would happen if a parent wasn't. So yeah.
That's good. Okay, so I just want to come back to the whole dysregulation, regulation thing, because one of the things that I do teach as well is nervous system regulation. And I know it's a huge part of spell to communicate. Yeah. So can you talk about the relationship between regulation and communication? Because I think parents don't realize that the two are actually connected.
Yeah, absolutely. They're so connected. When we're looking at how these motor actions unfold, a lot of our spellers kind of live in this subcortical reptilian, I'm in fight or flight majority of the time kind of area in their brain. So a lot of the work that we're doing in regulating is essentially trying to pull them out of that fight or flight state. When we're looking at all of these super impulsive motor actions or where a lot of this dysregulation comes from, if we're trying to be intentional and if we're trying to be purposeful, it comes from a very different part of the brain, right? We can't be working our brain in 2 different places at the same time. So having that regulation is really just the building block to getting to anything, right? If we can pull you out of that, that just fight or flight state when we are so dysregulated, whether that is anxiety or stress, or really I see it even with excitement, right? Like our excitement just takes over and we lose control of our bodies. But getting up to that kind of higher thinking, logical thinking part of the brain, super tricky. And it takes a lot of work, especially because we don't get that much practice with it day in and day out when we're just kind of living in this impulsive, dysregulated state. So that really is one of the biggest things to kind of lay the groundwork for spelling is getting our bodies to a state where we are regulated. We do have whatever sensory input that we need. And then one of my big things that I have to work on as a practitioner with the speller is that co-regulation of I have to stay calm. I have to kind of coach your body and prompt your body through it with those motor cues of, hey, bring your body up, walk your feet over, hips on your chair, anything like that. This kind of motor cues and motor supports that I can give as well to kind of help with that co-regulation.
Okay. And just to be clear, is what does dysregulation look like in the kiddos when you're doing a spelling test? I mean, I know what mine does, but
it can look like so many different things. I have kiddos that run out of the room. It's really, really hard for them to keep their bodies in the room. I have kiddos that voice, their dysregulation might yell or scream. Kiddos might be super impulsive and we might, hit or grab hair or whatever that may be. I even have spellers that their dysregulation looks like they poke super, super fast on the boards. Or dysregulation can look like maybe I can't even hold my eyes on the board. It can look like so many different things. And I rarely see just one piece of this in a session. There's usually a lot of different moving pieces of this dysregulation going on at one time.
I mean, it's a lot. And when you see that, you think, or that it's very easy to think that they don't want to do the spelling, but they actually do. They actually do want to do
Yeah.
study. So
Yeah.
obviously, you were saying in your previous answer that you've obviously got to keep yourself regulated as well, because you've got to regulate for your kiddo. So, and this was a later question, but I wanted to bring it forward, is the Spell to Communicate isn't just a therapy where, the parents drop off their kids and they leave it. They are part of this process, right? I mean, they're part in the room,
Yeah.
helping to regulate the kids. So what suggestions do you have for the parents? Because they also have to regulate themselves, because the kids feed off their parents' calmness and
Yeah.
regulation as well. So how would you suggest that the parents handle that?
You might be better equipped to answer this than me. But my biggest thing, I think that education piece goes the longest way. So understanding that your kid's body might be doing this one thing, and I know it's stressing you out, but it's probably not what their brain is actually trying to get their body to do. So having that piece of it all is that what they might be doing probably isn't intentional, and it's not meaningful, and it's not, from this mean, whatever kind of place, right? That's kind of what I have found has been the biggest thing of, let's work on understanding why their body is doing this. And then what can we do to help support sensory and support motor to regulate and to calm their bodies down.
Okay. Well, that helps at least. Okay, so I know there's a lot of controversy around letterboarding methods. Now, some organizations have said that there's not enough evidence and that it's similar to facilitated communication. So I just want you to talk about what's happening there. Why do they say that?
Yeah. I think spelled communication has such a long history. And there are, of course, some things that people take a snippet of one video and it goes viral. And that one video makes all spelled communication like really, really bad. But with all of the spelling methods, and I can't speak to other ones, so I'm not trained in them, but they're all valid, right? Whatever that may look like, whatever the differences may be, there are so many people, so many non-speakers that use a variety of these spelling modalities that have beautiful, robust communication. And as far as the evidence, right, I have not met a single person who has seen a speller in person and has not left believing in it.
Okay.
So that's kind of my answer always is come to a session and join in and ask the speller questions, right? I can sit here all day and talk about all these things, but hearing the answers from a speller themselves, it's a huge shift change, and you can't not believe in spelling once you see it firsthand. Has always been, and will always be my response. Yeah.
I mean, it is actually, I'm unconverted, so
Yeah.
no. Okay, so one of the things that they say as well is that sometimes some of their practitioners will hold the elbow or that kind of thing. So how can they know that it's truly the speller's words or it's the practitioner's influence?
Yeah. In Spelling to Communicate, we don't do any sort of physical support. So not something that I can reliably speak on. But I will say, in other spelling modalities, they do look a little bit different. And that just depends on the speller and what their body needs and all the things. But as far as us in S2C, I never do any sort of hand support or elbow or shoulder or anything like that to kind of support him on this.
Right. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. And how do you know? You've spoken about trying Spell to Communicate for sort of 6 months to get a feel for it. So what does it look like to move towards independence? From your, what does it look like? You're in a class. I know what it looks like, but what do you do, and how do you get them to independence? How do you get the spellers to independence?
Yeah, really just building those purposeful motor skills. So if we can get 26 individual motor plans for each letter on your letter board, then you can say anything you want, right? So kind of going back to that marathon running sort of comparison here of we're doing strength training, we are eating healthy, we are going on walks, we're going on runs, we're doing all the things. And in spelling, that looks like doing lesson-based sessions. So I'm asking questions to start that only have one possible response. So if I'm doing a lesson on, trying to think what we did this past week, on J.K. Rowling, whatever it may be, a question that I might ask after I read out a little bit of information would be, okay, what author are we talking about today? So I know what the answer is. Max or whoever else I'm working with knows who the answer is. And that's where I jump in and provide that motor support of we have to get your eyes to your letter. We have to hold your body in your chair. We have to reach and we have to poke, and kind of building up from there. So once we kind of have that, we always start on those 3 boards. We eventually go up to the 26th board once we've reached that level of accuracy on our 3s that have the alphabet kind of split up. And just kind of broadening it from there. Kind of think of it as a staircase, right? So we're answering those known questions. I know the answer. Mom in the room knows the answer. Speller knows the answer. And then kind of broadening up what we're able to ask. So then I might ask a semi-open question of, okay, well, we were talking about J.K. Rowling, but I also mentioned 3 other different authors. Tell me one of those authors that I mentioned. So then we only have 3 possible responses, but I don't know where the speller is going to go. So I might be able to provide some support once they get through the first few letters and I know who they're spelling out. But that's when those choices kind of start to come in. So then asking a question where, okay, we had 3 options here. Now we have a question that maybe has 10. And then just kind of graduating to maybe give me a synonym for this one word that I use. It's still one of those questions that I have a lot of context for. If I asked you to give me a synonym for the word big, I know you could spell huge or large or giant, whatever that may be. But it's kind of the speller's choice of how they go. And I'm just there to follow their pokes and to support their body. So it's really just building up those motor plans and also building up that endurance at the same time, because you go from answering these maybe 1-word responses to then graduating to a full sentence or 3 sentences in this open-ended thought that you're asking. But yeah, just kind of building up from there and just focusing on that motor piece of this communication.
So I'm imagining that each spinner is a bit different. So, I mean, their pace isn't the same. So some would find it easier and others would take a little bit more time to work to independence.
Absolutely.
Okay, so have you ever had a speller say something to their parents that completely changed the parents' understanding of their child? Do you have a story to tell?
Oh gosh. Let's think. I have so many stories. There was one, it was when I was working in Tennessee, and the individual that I was working with, he was late 30s. And his mom was coming in, and mom wasn't in on the sessions. It was a situation where his staff would bring him to our sessions. But it was really the first time that mom was watching him spell. And we had told her bits and pieces, but she hadn't seen it yet. And this mom, who I love dearly, and I'm visiting them next weekend, but she was still really, really pushing for speech therapy. And you have to use your words, even though it is so hard to get your body to pronounce and to verbalize all these things. But the first time, I think he was maybe 3 sentences in, and he was advocating for himself of, I can't speak, right? Like, it's not words coming out of my mouth. It's vocalizations that are, that some people might understand as words and might understand the meaning. But him advocating for himself of, I'm done with speech therapy. I'm done with trying to use my words that my body just can't enunciate and can't make. And we need to focus on seeing Olivia more, and you need to get on the letter boards. So just, and this is a 30-plus-year-old man with his mom who's, however old she is. Yeah, absolutely. But seeing him advocate for himself and seeing that shift change of, oh my gosh, I've been pushing for the wrong thing for 30 years. Because what do? You think that's it, right? That's what you're supposed to do as a parent is you push for any and all the things. And that's exactly what she did. But that's probably I have so many favorite stories, but that's probably one of them of him being able to advocate to his mom himself. And then of course it spells out, I love you, mom, and all the things, which she had never heard before, right? Verbally, he was never able to say, I love you, but he was able to spell it out on the board for the first time in 36 years.
Use that.
Yeah.
First time. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah. And also, I mean, we get told as parents of autism, you should do this and you should do this and you should do this. And you follow it because you think that's what it should do. But the answers won't always come in a linear manner or in the way that you think, all the kids are so different. They need different things.
Absolutely.
So, it's always important to keep, I think, an open mind to see what works for your child. So from the kids that you teach, that you work with, is there something like almost a universal message that they want people to know that they've not been able to say before?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is just to presume competence in their kids, to get their kids spelling. And also every speller that I've worked with has just this huge passion for advocacy, for talking to other parents, for reaching out to other non-speakers, whatever that may look like. I have a handful of spellers right now that have started Facebook pages to post what they write on Facebook and to share with everyone that way. So those kind of themes of pushing for that presumption of competence, even if your kiddo isn't spelling yet, but having that shift change of talk to them like they understand, talk directly to them, don't talk around them. And then that huge push for advocacy too, which it's always almost eerie, as a practitioner and seeing it all day, every day of, you've been silent essentially for however many years. And you just have this fire inside of you for advocating. That's always the biggest push. And it's so cool and humbling for me to see is that a lot of your first open responses is you talking about, mom and dad, you need to tell so-and-so about spelling, or you need to get the word out there about spelling. It's so selfless. And I know if I was in that position and I spent however many years not being able to communicate, I don't think that would be my first thing. But oftentimes for the non-speakers that I've worked with, it's been this selfless push for advocate and tell people and presume competence and all of the things.
It's so amazing how selfless they are. I've got a story from when we used to do a little thing around Christmas.
Yeah.
Where Tisha would ask him, what would he like for Christmas? And he would say, he's got everything he needs, but please could Father Christmas provide some clothes and some toys for those less fortunate, even food for those less fortunate. And I mean, at the time, he was like 7 years old.
Oh, yeah.
Which 7-year-old thinks about that? They think about toys. And I mean, most kids are uniquely selfish, and they should be. I mean, we're kids, and yet the spellers or the autistic children are so different. They are so world-wise almost.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of, there's like a whole movement happening here with these kids, and they are advocating for themselves, and they're going to college and they're getting jobs and they're writing books and poems and getting out of there. And I think a lot of parents think, well, that's fine for other kids, but not mine.
Yeah.
So what do you say to those parents?
Yeah. I think it's never your kid until it is your kid, We have a kind of a phrase in Spelling to Communicate is that it's not a miracle, it's just motor. But I think so often parents, it is a miracle for them, right? This is the first time that this has ever been happening for them and to them and for their kid. But it really is just that motor piece. It's all of the people that I see, obviously they're so special and I love all my clients dearly, but they are not standing out, right? This is something that anyone with autism, with apraxia, is capable of getting their body to learn to do. So it's not that the clients that I see are not special. They absolutely are, but not in that sense, right? Of this is not this miracle case for this one person. This is anyone. Anyone can learn how to do this and learn how to build up those purposeful motor skills.
Yeah. Well, that's hopeful for a lot of parents, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I know this is one of your special projects, is trying to get spell to communicate in schools.
Mm.
And what do you think needs to change? What do you wish schools knew about non-speaking students?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, it all goes back to that apraxia piece of, at least for myself, I know in all my years of schooling and jobs and all the things, I had never even heard the term apraxia. So my biggest thing is, how are we supposed to support these students when we don't even know what's going on with their bodies? The biggest thing is always going to be education, whether it's public school or private school or whatever it may look like. If we're not understanding this apraxia piece, if we're not understanding the motor piece and what motor support is needed to communicate, then what are we doing, right? But it's hard. It's hard to unlearn a lot of different things. I know when I first heard and was learning about spelling to communicate, I had to unlearn a lot of the things that I had been taught throughout the years and working in a lot of the jobs, right? That, there's 4 reasons why you're doing this, and it's this behavior and it's this reason or whatever it may be. So I think that's a big piece of this too, is that a lot of professionals, we have to unlearn, and we almost have to admit that we were wrong, which is not an easy thing to do. I know it was hard for me to admit that, wow, I didn't realize they were listening this whole time. And you always kind of know when you know that they know more than they can show, but to have that true presuming confidence and understanding that this is entirely a motor thing, a lot to shift, a lot to unlearn. And yeah, admitting that you're wrong is not always easy. I know it wasn't for me. So.
I think being wrong in this situation is actually cool.
It is. It is.
Positive.
Yeah.
If you've been wrong the whole time, it's actually positive going forward. So,
Absolutely.
So what is the most profound thing you've heard one of the spellers say to you? And I'll share my own story about what Max did, but have you got a story?
Oh, gosh. I think just being a part of maybe spellers their first time ever talking to their parents and just seeing their personalities come out and seeing what they say to their parents for the first time. So it might not, I don't know if I can even pinpoint what the thing, but just, how humbling and how rewarding for me to be a little part of that. I can't imagine anything better, any sort of job, but just being a small little piece in that and seeing, whether that's them telling their parents, I love you for the first time. Or I had a guy a few weeks ago who's an open speller, and he was calling his dad Daddy-O. And it's like those little things of, seeing their personalities and getting to joke around with your parents or your sister or your friends or whoever that may be for the first time is probably, it might not be these deep, meaningful responses, but there's nothing like getting to communicate with people for the first time.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you my little story about what.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think when this was. This must have been in 21. Because Mark, my husband, we got engaged in 21. And we were with Max's practitioner back in South Africa. And he wanted to write us a letter that would be read out at our engagement party. And I wasn't allowed to be in the room, obviously, when they read this letter. And then we had a friend who actually officiated our engagement party, and he read the letter. And it still brings tears to my eyes. They read the letter, and it was just like there wasn't a dry eye in the house. He was just saying, how much Mark meant to us and how much, he welcomed into the family and what I meant to him. It was just the most amazing letter. And I will share it in the show notes if anybody wants to read it. It is the most beautiful letter. And just to know that he understands. I mean, and at the time it was about 6. He was about 6 or 7 years old, 6, when he wrote this letter, and just how much he understood about what was going on around him. It was such a gift. It was amazing.
Yeah, I would love to read it too. So send it to me.
I'll give it to you. Okay, so for parents who want to explore Spell to Communicate, what do they need to do? How do they find a practitioner? What do they need to look for?
Yes. It's the International Association of Spelling is Communication. So it is i-asc.com.org. One of those, but on there, they will have a practitioner location map, and you can send them an email and they will connect you with a practitioner who is closest to you.
Okay, great. I know that you are based in Charlotte, obviously. So how can somebody get in touch with you? If they've got any questions, or if they want to work with you, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can send me a message from my email. It's just brain2bodytherapy.com, or my email, it's Olivia@brain2bodytherapy.com. So either way works. Either way will get you into my email inbox.
You're fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on this call. I really appreciate you. And I really love the fact that you are so passionate about getting the word out for Spell to Communicate. So we'll do as much as we possibly can to help. Okay, so before we sign off, I just want to remind you again of the regulated, resourced, and ready masterclass, which I am holding on March 16th at 12 p.m. EST. So if you are a parent of an autistic child, this is for you, no matter how old your child is. And I am so super excited about this masterclass, the first one I've done, first one like this that I've ever done. And if you attend live, there are going to be quite a few surprises. So I want to see you there. And I will put the link in the show notes, so sign up. All right, everyone, I will speak to you next week. Bye-bye.